Welcome to Ask GMBN Tech. In fact, this one is a little bit different to usual. This is Ask Me Specific Questions special this month. So the guys on our social media team put some posts up asking you guys to ask me some questions about the worst bikes I've ridden, the most unusual bikes I've ridden, accidents I've had, all that sort of stuff. And we've had so many questions. We're simply not going to be able to answer all of them, unfortunately, but I'm going to have a good go at getting through this list. And if there's enough, we'll make 2 shows out of it. So hopefully this is quite entertaining for you. So the first question up is from Daniel, and it says, what's your worst injury whilst fixing a bike? You mentioned that some of your worst injuries have been in the workshop. I'm not sure if I said that or not. If I did, I think I meant to say when riding to work rather than in the workshop. But in the workshop, I've had all your typical sort of injuries. Skin off my knuckles when slipping on an Allen key or rounded bolt. Blood blisters. In fact, I've got one right there. Caught in between a set of pliers just when I was really trying to pinch something. They slipped and pinched my skin. A few lifted fingernails as well, that's always very unpleasant. Yeah, and also splinters from inner cables, which is excruciatingly painful. I'd much rather have pedals to the shin than one of those splinters because they are just horrible and they're so hard to get out. But if it's going back to riding to work, then yeah, I've had my 2 worst crashes actually riding to work. So one, in fact, this is more or less how I got into the bike industry. I was testing a set of forks for MBUK before I worked there. So this must have been like 1999, something like that. And I don't really remember too much about it. I know what I did, and I basically bunny hopped off this massive curb out into a road. It was at a causeway in Staines, so it's quite a bank down to the road. And the forks, which were a pair of Stratos FR4, so it was like a dual slide on fork with 4-inch travel, they snapped clean in half. And basically my face just went straight and pole drived into the ground. And I broke my nose, my cheek and my eye socket and basically slid down the road on my face. Now, I'm lucky to be alive because I was wearing a helmet, but the helmet literally exploded on impact and I was left with the straps and remaining straps and bits of polystyrene around my head, and the rest had just disintegrated basically in the impact. That was a skate style helmet, so it was quite a tough helmet as well. I think it might have been a Protec, so really thank you for keeping that in one piece, to be honest. Pretty nasty accident all round. Like I nearly tore my ear off at the same time in that same crash where I slid down the road like I'd go faster stripes all down the side of my head. And amusingly, I had long hair at the time. Went into hospital because my side of my head was such a mess. They basically shaved all my hair off as well to treat all my wounds. So double whammy, came out of a hamburger eye, like face all messed up, broken nose and no hair. So I looked like a right idiot. More so than usual, in fact. And then a few years later, when actually working at MBUK, I was riding to work on my Curtis SX24, so it's a dirt jump bike basically, with 24-inch wheels, a single speed, and the free hub gave way on it. So it's the same effect as when you snap a chain. Pedaling down the road, sprinting, it just went span all the way around, so it threw my weight forwards. Same thing again, landed on the right side of my face, same nose, same cheek, same eye socket, exactly the same injury. The second time basically, except I remembered everything about it. I remember hitting the floor, I remember like not feeling a thing, my face felt all numb, there's blood like just pouring out my nose and stuff, and some nice person from a charity shop was putting a blanket around me telling me I was going to be alright. And I looked up, my bike was halfway down the road where it just catapulted down the road, and well, that was it. So check your free up bodies and check your chains is the moral of that story. But yeah, they're the 2 worst injuries, and actually I'd still get some pain around the side of my head in like really cold weather sometimes. So but glad I was wearing a helmet, so might not be here today. This next question is real hard one actually. So this is from Anthony Nielsen. Which retro bike, this is based on I'm guessing on the Cannondale bikes recently, so the modern retro ones. Which retro bike would you like to see a modern geometry remake of? For me, I'd like to see a modern geometry 29er Cannondale Super V DH Fulcrum. Yeah, that'd be a pretty bitching bike to be fair, but I don't know, that's a really hard question because there's a lot of old bikes, and the thing with the old bikes is they're great memories, but really you ride them now and none of them ride very well. You know, you can admire the suspension platforms on them for the time and that, but compared to what we have with geometry and wheel sizes and all the differences, that all those marginal improvements we've had over the years, but I mean, bikes today are the best we've ever had, and really it's pretty hard to get a bad bike. But my favourite bike I think of all time, and the bike that if I could still buy a retro one to build up now, would be a an amp research B1, so one of the original ones. You used to see them quite a lot as a mongoose amplifier, identical frame set. And there was various others, you know, the B3, B4s, like different generations of them, but it was all about the original one. That's the one I really liked, and in particular that mongoose amplifier version. Now, the amp research, it had the Horst Lightner link on there, known as the Horst link, which later became the FSR link, as previously mentioned, and also had the McPherson strut. So the seat stays basically went straight into a shock design, straight into the frame, basically. If you look at the McPherson strut design, you see it a lot in off-road racing cars, you see it on car suspension and many other designs. It's quite popular, and back then it was amazing. This thing felt so good, so active under pedaling, active under braking, but it didn't really sort of, the pivot point was quite low, so it wasn't affected too much. So actually, minimal chain growth on that bike. It was a really, really good performing bike. Now, of course, the geometry back then, it was very short. So I'd quite like to make a long version of it. And it had that really nice spindly twin down tube. So almost the size of my fingers, these down tubes were, twin all the way. And unfortunately, they were famous for, shall we say, parting way. But nevertheless, I think it's still one of the nicest looking frames out there, and quite simply, I would have a modern version of that. And actually, Kotick, their bikes kind of remind me of them in a way, but I'd still prefer the ball burnish, like the polished look. I'm a huge fan of the Cannondale bikes, as we mentioned on the show recently. Something about the Cannondale bikes, the F4000s, 2000s, all that. So they're just beautiful looking bikes. They had it right the first time round. They're amazing welds that were like polished and sort of filed off afterwards. So the frames almost look like carbon fibre swoopy frames back then. So the modern one of those is amazing with the lefty Ocho fork on there. What else is there really? Danger Holm's sort of nod to the Klein attitude. Arguably one of the finest looking mountain bikes of all time, the original one that weighed 20 pounds, 26-inch wheels, mission control bar stem, beautiful. And he made a modern classic with that Scott, that was cool. I did actually do a modern classic of my own quite a few years ago now, and I think it was for the 25th anniversary. No, it's the 20th anniversary of the GT Zaska frame. So the GT Zaska is a frame that Hans Ray rode, and this was at a time I was working at Mountain Biking UK magazine, and I got sent one of these frames and I was like, this is the most beautiful thing ever. I wanted to do a modern classic rebuild on this. So I spoke to guys at GT and they're like, keep hold of this thing, do what you can with it. I'm sure it'll make a great story. So I got hold of a set of RockShox Revelation forks, which was the nearest in sort of the look and the amount of travel to the RockShox Judy SL that would have been on that bike originally. And I spoke to Argos, which is a frame sprayer over in Bristol, and they still had some of the original Judy yellow paint over there. So I had the forks resprayed in Judy yellow paint, got some original RockShox Judy graphics for those forks, even though it was a Revelation, from TF Tuned, and they also tuned the fork up on there. I got hope to fire up the anodizer again. I had to sweet talking for that to get purple hubs and purple disc brakes front and rear on it. And it's basically a period looking bike but with modern components on it. It even had reruns of the Panaracer Smoke and Dark tyres on it. This bike is one of the nicest bikes I've ever built. In fact, it was the nicest bike I ever built. Unfortunately, I gave it away as a competition prize. And I'm still not sure why I did that, because it was essentially my bike. I was going to buy the frame, all the bits were pretty much mine anyway. But yeah, I gave it away in a competition in MBUK magazine. And annoyingly, the guy that won it, his dad told him to sell it, so he sold it. It's like, who listens to your dad when your dad tells you to sell a bike like that? What a plonker. But thankfully, someone, I think off like the Retro Bike Forum or perhaps Single Track Magazine Forum, they got wind of it and they bought it. And as far as I know, they still own it. And once a year, they put those Panaracer tyres on it, take it for a ride as it's supposed to be ridden, and swap them back and then continue using the bike. So if it's out there and if any of you own it, I would love to hear from you, because I built that bike and it's a little part of me, I think. But yeah, Mongoose Amp B1, I think, is what I'd probably do. Okay, next one, I've totally been called out. So this is from Mark Adamson, a good childhood friend of mine, owns a very cool audio store in Harrow called Harrow Audio, in fact. When you were young, did you ever chop your handlebars down to approximately 385 millimeters to speed up your steering? Didn't we all do it back then? Yeah, I've got vague memories of doing this, and they were so short. It was the fashion. I wasn't alone in doing this. You had to fit your bar ends on and your controls, and you used to have one brake lever higher than the other, so the barrels would be over the top of each other, which just sounds bonkers. And I remember the moment my dad was like, "You sure you want to do this?" And I was like, yeah, like Dave Hemming does it, like it's the way. You have to have my bars like this. Cut them down, put everything back on, got on the bike, rode it outside the house. He's like, "How do they feel?" And in my head I was like, this is the worst thing I've ever done. And out on the outside, it's like, oh, they're amazing. Feels so good. Like everyone, you should all do this. So I told everyone to do it. And I think some of my friends did it. Maybe Mark did it, which is why he's calling me out. But I blame Dave Hemming for this. Dave, I hope you're watching. Dave is actually a bit of a legend. He's had probably 20 front covers of MBUK magazine over the years. He was the first British racer to bring back a medal from the World Champs. He got silver in downhill. Absolute sterling guy. But you with your fashions, mate, like you made life hard for people growing up in mountain biking, I'll tell you that. But you were the original influencer, I think. Long before YouTube and people like Casey Neistat, you were an influencer. Sounds pretty cool, I think. Okay, next up from Chazcho. Is running a dropper post on an XC hardtail worth it? Would it look odd? 100%, of course it's worth it. A dropper post is probably one of the single best inventions. Now I've actually said that in the past that I would rather have a dropper post and a rigid bike than a full suspension bike with a straight up seat post, because I just, there's way more advantages in being able to move your body position that dramatically on a bike and keep your centre of gravity low than I think a suspension bike that you can ride really fast off-road, but you still have to suffer with your body position if you have the saddle at full height. But at the same time, with cross-country riding, there is something about mastering how to ride the bike on technical terrain and leaving the saddle where it is. You do get a lot of respect from riders for doing that, and you will find that a lot of riders actually will give you stick for having a dropper post. But in my eyes, I have a cross-country bike coming. I'm going to be putting a dropper post on it because I'm a tall person, so my body weight is up high. So basically that weight up high can act like a pendulum and actually put you at a huge disadvantage when you're riding technical terrain. Why would I not want to get my weight nice and low? All right, arguably, you're adding weight to a bike by having a dropper post, but as we saw on that BMC 4-stroke that Neil rode with the integrated dropper post, that weight is coming down and they're looking a lot nicer. So it won't be long, I think, until everyone is running dropper posts on XC bikes. Now, at the UCI World Cup, it was interesting to see that most of the women are running dropper posts and only a handful of the men are, but it's starting to happen. And you are definitely starting to see benefits in the way people ride. But I just want to emphasise the point, you can master riding on a bike without having a dropper post. Look at Nino Schurter, one of the greatest cross-country racers that's ever lived. His technique on a bike is absolute textbook. The guy is phenomenal. This guy is unbelievable. I'm still sure it'll be faster with a dropper post. Maybe that's a video we could ask Nino to do. I'd love to see what he could do on a cross-country bike, head-to-head against himself with a dropper post and without in a time trial, doing the full Nino attack. I think that'd be a pretty interesting video to see how his riding changes and the way he approaches stuff. But something that is important to say about dropper posts is it's not just about being able to go faster or being a bit more rad with your riding. I think the point is that it's safer, but also it saves wasting energy. Now, a lot of the time, if you're riding a cross-country bike and you've got the high saddle position, you can be fighting the bike when you're riding technical terrain that wants to almost throw you over the bars and that. And fighting the bike wastes a lot of energy. So it's quite traumatic on your body. You're tensing the whole time. With a dropper post, a saddle down out of the way, a nice low center of gravity, more room to move around on the bike, you're conserving energy, you're riding faster, and you're riding safer. I can't see why anyone would not want to run one. So yeah, get a dropper post, basically. That's actually all we've got time for now. There's loads more questions here, so we will delve back into this again in the future. But if you've got any comments on the questions I've been through today, let us know in those comments below. Don't forget to get your questions in again for next week's show and any further shows. hellotech@gmbn.com and of course in those comments. And for another cool tech related video, click down here for all the sorts of kit you should keep in your car to make your riding life easier. As always, don't forget to give us a huge thumbs up, subscribe to GMBN Tech, and if you've got any suggestions for any cool videos you'd like to see us make, let us know in those comments. Cheers guys.